this. And you can follow up by saying, hey, did you get that publication? I'll probably actually be the one who oversees that. But just some updates with House to House. A lot of good things going on there with all that good work. All right. So last week we covered chapters 1 and 2. Each chapter I'm kind of pausing and saying, hey, this is the big idea I want you to take away from this chapter. What was chapter 1 all about? Chapter 1 was the decree. Who was the king during that time? Cyrus, he was the king of Persia. And he gave this decree. He gave the decree by mouth, the word of mouth, and also in the written law, basically for these people to come back to the land that God had always promised them and to rebuild this temple. And so chapter 1 is just kind of the law, you might say, the decree, the going forth of this. And then chapter 2 is what? What's all chapter 2? It's a big long list of names, right? But what does that long list of names tell us? Who all the people that left that Babylonian captivity that came back to possess that land and that are going to help rebuild the temple. So you can look and you can see all the number of people that were there. So chapter number 1 is the decree. Chapter number 2 is the people. Then we come to chapter number 3. And this is where we're going to pick up. The big idea from chapter number 3 is the altar is built on the temple. Okay, the foundation is going to be laid soon, but the altar is there built. Okay, and you're going to see as we go through chapter number 3, they're going to go ahead and start using that altar because what happens on an altar? Sacrifices, right? Did they just have just a couple sacrifices, or they do a lot of different types of sacrifices? And you're going to see that here as we open up in chapter number 3 that, hey, this altar was not just used one time a year or, once a week, but they used it quite often for different kinds of sacrifices, different types of feasts, different types of festivals, all these different types of things moving forward. But that's the big idea I want you to know from chapter number 3 is, hey, the work is started. Okay, the progress has begun on building this temple. Okay, so look at verse number 1 of chapter number 3. And when the 7th month had come, and the children of Israel were in the cities, the people gathered together as one man to Jerusalem. So notice this, that this was the year 535 BC. Now if you remember, we've marked in our Bibles that this decree was given in 538. So it was about 2 years when they finally were able to begin construction. And you might be thinking, well, why in the world did they have to wait 2 years to start this construction on this temple? Well, what do you need in order to build a temple? You need all the supplies, right? You think about our today in society, how hard it is to get supplies to build a house. The supply chain is just crazy, the demand chain, the getting of the materials, okay? But here they didn't have the interstate system. They didn't have planes. They didn't have trains. So they had to move everything the old-fashioned way. So it took a very long time to get the wood, to get all the different types of materials that they would need to this place. And they had to transport it, if I remember correctly, from Joppa. So it was a very long distance that they had to get these supplies to where they are building this temple. So that's why it was taking a while. Excuse me, I said this wrong. It was 3 months, not 2 years. I don't know where I got 2 years from. I wrote down that wrong date. So, and when the 7th month had come, this is 3 months after they have arrived. That 7th month would be equivalent to our September if you're comparing calendars, which, let me say this, it is very hard to compare calendars because they used a different type of system than we used, but the best we can picture would be about September. So 3 months after they arrived, they finally are able to gather together. Now, where do you think these people gathered together at? So here these people are. They've all come out of Babylonian captivity. They finally got the supplies after 3 months because it took a while for them to get there. Where do you think they gathered together at? It says the people gathered together. All right, but where in particular in Jerusalem? Yep. probably at Solomon's temple, right? They're going to rebuild this temple, right? So they're going to gather together at Solomon's temple there to do it. Now, I want you to circle that phrase, arose as one man. We're going to talk about that when we get to the application part of chapter number 3, when we get through with this chapter. Remember that. They arose as one man. What's another way of saying that? They had the same common purpose. They all agreed. There was no bickering and complaining and fighting. But they all had that same common purpose, right? They arose as one man. They had unity, essentially, is what they had here. But remember that, because we're going to see that again and again as we move through chapter number 3. All right, chapter number 2, or verse number 2 of chapter number 3. Then Joshua, the son of Jehoiada, and his brethren, the priests, and Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and his brethren, arose and built the altar, the God of Israel, to burn offerings on it, as it is written, according to the law of Moses, the man of God. Now, let's break down verse number 2. Who was Jeshua, or Joshua? Does anybody remember from last week? The high priest, okay? I think it's chapter number 2, verse 2. Yes, okay, he's mentioned there, chapter 2, verse 2, and he is the high priest, okay? He is the one that would conduct a lot of these. All right, then who is Zerubbabel? The leader, and he's the builder, right? So you got your two leaders here. You got Jeshua, the high priest, the spiritual leader, and you got Zerubbabel, the physical leader, that's putting forth this effort of rebuilding this temple. Okay, so you see your two main characters here mentioned in verse number 2. And they arose and built this altar to burn sacrifices on it. Now, how did they, according to what? Did they just say, hey, you know what? I know that we're supposed to rebuild this temple, and if we're going to rebuild it, we're going to do it the way that the original one was done, right? So how did they do that? As the law commanded. I have that underlined in my text. You know why? Because they didn't do it their way. If they were going to do it the right way, what was the right way to do it? According to the law that was written during that time. They weren't going to make it bigger. They weren't going to make it better. They were going to do it. The best way they could do it was what? According to the way that God had told them to do it. Okay? Right beside that phrase, as is written in the law, Leviticus chapter 23, and we're going to go here in a second. Leviticus 23, verses 34 through 36, because that's where the original law was given. Okay, remember, the law is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Those first 5 books of the Bible, that's the law of Moses. And Leviticus tells them, hey, this is the way it's supposed to be done. So go with me to Leviticus chapter 23. Leviticus chapter 23, verses 34 through 36. All right, notice what it says here. Actually, let's begin verse 33. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, so who's speaking here? God is speaking. Jehovah is speaking. Now notice what he said. Speak to the children of Israel, saying. So what is Moses going to be here? You got God speaking, but God is telling Moses to tell the people this. So what is Moses here, essentially? He's being the spokesman. He's being a mediator. He's basically being a prophet, right? What's a prophet? He's the one that's speaking on behalf of God, right? A mediator is that go-between. He's being between God and the people. Okay, so notice that. He says, speak to the children of Israel, saying, the 15th day of the 7th month shall be the feast of the Tabernacles for 7 days to the Lord. And on the first day there shall be a holy convocation. You shall do it, no customary work on it. For 7 days you shall offer an offering made by fire to the Lord. On the 8th day you shall have a holy convocation, and you shall offer an offering made by fire to the Lord. It is sacred assembly, and you shall do it, no customary work on it. Okay, and he keeps going, talking about this idea of the Feast of the Tabernacles. Okay, and that's kind of what you're going to see here in the next few verses. But notice, hey, that altar had a specific purpose, right? And that was to offer burnt offerings on it. And there was a certain way to do it, and it was according to what? According to the law of Moses, according to the way God wanted it done. Okay, so go back with me to Ezra. Now let's look at verse number 3. Now, from about verse 3 to about verse number 5, you're going to see these different offerings that are taking place. Ezra 3, verses 3 through 5. You're going to notice about 3 or 4 different types of offerings that take place. Look at verse 3. Though fear had come upon them because the people of the countries, they set an altar on its basin, and they offered burnt offerings on it to the Lord, both morning and evening burnt offerings. Okay, and that's what you're seeing here. You can see more about that in Exodus chapter 29. 38 through 42, talking about those offerings that they would do every morning and every evening. Okay, so that's one type of offering, was the ones that they did in the mornings and the evening. Now look at the second one, verse 4. And they kept the Feast of the Tabernacles, or the other way is the Feast of the Booths. That's what we just read about in Leviticus. Okay, now notice what it says here. As it is written, okay, that's what we just read in Leviticus, and offered the daily burnt offerings in numbered, required by ordinances for each day. Okay, and that was 8 straight days that they would offer this burnt offering upon that altar. Okay, so the first one is the morning and evening offerings. The second one is the Feast of the Tabernacles, or also known as the Feast of the Booths, that we read about in Leviticus 23. The third one here is mentioned in verse number 5. Afterwards, they would offer the regularly burnt offerings and those for new moons, for all the appointed feasts of the Lord that were consecrated, and those of everyone who was willing offered a free will offering to the Lord. Okay, so this new moons sacrifice, the third one that's mentioned here in this list of offerings, happened monthly. Okay, it was a monthly sacrifice. So you kind of see here that the first kind of offering was every day, morning and evening. The second one was a one that happened for 8 continuous days. And this last one happened just one time a month. It was a monthly type of sacrifice. And you can read about it in Numbers chapter 28, 11 through 15, about this new moon sacrifice, this new moon offerings. So those are just the different types of sacrifices that they all offered upon this altar after they had it built. All right, verse 6. From the first day of the 7th month, they began offering burnt offerings to the Lord, although the foundation of the temple had not been laid. So they had this altar built, but there's no slab built. Okay, that they have basically the way I have it pictured is they got this altar built, but there's nothing around it. Okay, and that's because they're still waiting on the supplies to do this. Now look at verse 7. They also gave money to the masons and the carpenters, and food and drink and oil to the people of Sidon and Tyre, to bring cedar logs from Lebanon to the Sea of Joppa, according to the permission which they had from King Cyrus of Persia. Okay, and so basically they're saying, hey, these people that are working, these people that they're doing all this woodwork, this masonry work, we're going to pay you. We're going to give you money because of the labor that you've been able to do, and we're going to feed you because of the work that you've been able to do. And notice that they're bringing these cedar logs to be able to finish this project and have the temple laid. All right, verse 8. Now in the second month, that second month will be equivalent to our April or May, according to most scholars, of the second year. That would be 536 BC, of their coming to the house of God at Jerusalem. Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, Jeshua, the son of Jehoiada, and the rest of their brethren and priests and the Levites, and all those who come out of captivity of Jerusalem began to work, and appointed the Levites from 20 years old and above to oversee the work of the house of the Lord. So here they come. They come out. You got Zerubbabel, your physical leader, your builder. You got the high priest, Jeshua, coming together. And now they're bringing all these people that are 20 years of age and older to come together to appoint and oversee this work. Verse 9. Then Jeshua with his sons and his brothers, Kadmiel, with his sons and the sons of Judah. Notice again this phrase. I would circle it. Arose as how many? 1, to oversee those working in the house of God, and the sons of Hendad with their sons and their brethren, the Levites. Okay, so you got all these people, you got all these different families coming together. Did they say, hey, my family wants this done, and my family wants this done, and I want this done? No, what happened? They all had a common purpose, right? They all had a common mission, and that is to rebuild this temple. And to do it, they did it by rising as one. Okay, they had unity. All right, verse 10. When the builders laid the foundation of the temple to the Lord, the priests stood in their apparel with trumpets, and the Levites, their son Evasive, with cymbals to praise the Lord according to the ordinances of David, king of Israel. Okay? Now, let's stop right there for a second. So here they are. Progress is being made, right? They have the altar built. They got the foundation laid now. They got a good structural foundation laid where they can build this temple up from here. But what did they do when they finally got this temple laid, or the foundation laid? What was the reaction that they had, or what was the actions that they did here when they got the foundation completed? They sang, but what else? They praised God, but there was something else. But they sang with what? Yep. So what kind of attitude did they have? Hey, we're finally able to see some things happen, right? We're thankful. We're going to sing. Why are they singing? Because they're praising God. And they did it according to the law. But notice the phrase with cymbals. Okay? What cymbals? Yeah. It's a mechanical use of instruments, right? I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Okay? Why did they do that? Why did they use mechanical music here during this time period? It's authorized, right? I'm going to give you the two verses that authorize it. 1 Chronicles 15:16 and 2 Chronicles 29, verses 25 and 26. Okay? So there's two passages in the Old Testament, okay, that is given for these people to use these instruments of music to worship God. Now, why do we not use instruments today? It's not authorized, right? Okay? That God gave them permission to do these things, right? Like I said, we could go to 1 and 2 Chronicles to see where God specifically commands them to use instruments of music. But today He does not. Okay? And if for some reason they went to this verse, okay, say I'm studying with somebody and they went to this specific verse to use to say, hey, here they are using cymbals to praise the Lord, and the Lord accepted it. You know what I would say? Well, what was their form of, where were they worshiping at during this time? What kind of building were they coming to worship? The temple, right? Was the temple the place that we need to go and worship today? And what are they going to say? They understand that, right? The temple was an Old Testament thing. The church is the New Testament place of worship, or the people of God where they come together. It's the same thing, right? The temple and those instrumental musics was nailed to the cross. It was put away. Those two things going together. And now we have voice, a cappella music that we sing to God, and we have the church. Okay? So think of it like this. Before the cross, you had the temple. You had instruments of music. God was nailed to the cross. And we have the New Testament that He ratified and bought with His blood to have this. Yes?
What was those two places you said that we could look that up and know that they
1 Chronicles 15:16 and 2 Chronicles 29, 25, and 26. So I point that out to say, hey, God, the Old Testament form of worship was what? Nailed to the cross, okay? Remember, this is written for our what? Learning, not for our law, okay? The temple is not binding to us today. Instrumental music is not binding to us today, or, it's not part of our law anymore because it's done away with. We're under that New Testament system of faith, okay?
I'll
Yeah.
When I try to talk to my family, that's something that some of them don't even, they just dismiss it.
Yeah.
The Old Testament is old. Why would we need the new if we were going to live by the old?
Read the book of Hebrews. There in the book of Hebrews, it talks about the first one having fault. If there was no fault in the first one, then we didn't need a second one. But there were some issues, right? It couldn't forgive our sins. The people couldn't keep it fully. It was all these different things that it could not do that Jesus had to come and die for. Yeah.
You don't need an old one
Yeah.
and a new one. Why would you need two different?
Yeah.
And it's that they just dismiss the New Testament.
Yeah.
It's this way.
Let me add one more. Let me add one more. Yeah. Let me add one more thing to this. Okay. We said, hey, the Old Testament. What did it have as far as its place of worship? The temple, right? It had what? Also, the instruments of music that God authorized. But thirdly, what's another thing that we've seen a lot here in chapter number 3? Sacrifices, right? And how often do they have to do these sacrifices? Every day, right? For 8 straight days, and some when it was the Feast of Booths. They had to do it morning and evenings. They had to do it monthly, right? Then the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, where they had to do it once a year, all those different types of things. But today, the book of Hebrews once again tells us what? Hey, Jesus died one time where we don't have to do those annual sacrifices, right? I mean, just in this one chapter alone, okay, we see 3 things. I mean, I could probably even maybe pull out more if we really got down to it. But 3 things that God authorized in the Old Testament, but has He authorized those 3 things in the New Testament? No. Okay? So I just wanted to point that out of, hey, there's a difference between the Old and New Testament. Okay? Let's keep going or I won't finish. Verse number 11, they sang responsibly. That means, hey, they were singing in unison. Okay? Remember, here's a New Testament application from this. Worship has to be what? Done indecently and in order, right? What were they doing here? They were doing things decently and in order. Okay? They sang responsibly. They were singing together, praising and giving thanks to the Lord, for He is good, for His mercy endures forever towards Israel. And the people shouted with a great shout, and they praised the Lord because the foundation of the Lord's house was laid. But many of the priests and Levites and heads of the Father's house, the old men, have seen the first temple. They wept with a loud voice when the foundation of the temple was laid before their eyes, yet many shouted aloud for joy, so that the people could not discern the noise of the shouts of joy from the noise of the weeping of the people. For the people shouted with a loud shout, and the sound was heard from afar. Okay, so like I said, a lot of different responses, right? You got a lot of cheerful people, but also you got some sad people, right? Why do you think these people were sad? Yeah. Right now they only have the foundation laid too, right? I think part this is just me speculating, but I think part of it might have been, hey, once that temple was destroyed, once it was utterly destroyed in 586 BC, they might have been thinking, hey, I'm never going to be able to see that temple again. But now they're seeing progress, and it's these tears of, hey, I might be able to see the temple in its glory again. Okay, not as good as it once was, but something to that effect. Okay, but just notice all the different reactions there. Lessons we can learn from chapter number 3. How did they do this project? As one. They arose as one man. In order to be successful in doing the work of the Lord, you got to have unity. Psalms 133:1. Blessed are those who have unity, right? Those that work together.